Hello, my name is Dr. Daniel H. I'm an associate professor with the Faculty of Education at Simon Fraser University and president of the Confederation of University Faculty Associations of British Columbia, CUFA, BC. CUFA, BC is the provincial voice for more than 5,500 university professors, instructors, lecturers, and academic librarians at 5 research institutions across the province. We work with faculty associations at Royal Roads University, Simon Fraser University, the University of British Columbia, the University of Northern British Columbia, and the University of Victoria. I would like to respectfully acknowledge that the land on which CUFA, BC's office is situated is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. We acknowledge, with respect, the diverse histories and cultures of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Stolo nations of this province. We recognize the inherent Indigenous rights and title, the implementation without reservation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and our support for the 94 calls to action by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We are here today to present the winners of the 2022 CUFA BC Distinguished Academics Awards. Each year since 1995, CUFA BC honors the outstanding scholarship and public policy contributions of distinguished academics in BC. Academics whose research and scholarly activity have made significant contribution to the community beyond the academy. We believe that the ideas that flow from universities contribute in significant ways to the public good, to our citizenry, our democratic landscape, our intellectual life, and our economy. The awards demonstrate the necessity and vitality of public universities, research, and scholarly activity. I am pleased today to present the winner of the 2022 CUFA BC Ehor Boyanowsky Award for Academic of the Year to Dr. Sarah Wright Cardinal. This award recognizes a specific and recent outstanding contribution to the community beyond the academy through research or other scholarly activity. It represents the admiration of colleagues from across institutions, disciplines, geographic borders, and beyond. Dr. Wright Cardinal joins us to talk about her research.
Atanse nisikasan Sarah Wright Cardinal, kaskewa no chinia, nimusan narcis cardinal, egwa no kamagadejule kosi. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Child and Youth Care in the Faculty of Human and Social Development at the University of Victoria. My name is Sarah Wright Cardinal, and I'm a Cree scholar from Treaty 8 territory.
Welcome. So can you tell me briefly about your research interests?
Sure. I frame my research as healing from colonial disruptions to Indigenous identities. We have a long, complex history in the settling of Canada that displaced Indigenous nations and Indigenous families. And through recent efforts of reconciliation, there's been an opportunity through the university to engage Indigenous resurgence, which is supporting Indigenous communities, nations, and organizations with the work, the vision, and work that they're doing, and with nations that I'm in relationship with, being able to support that work that centers sovereignty and community wellness, and specific to my work, reclaiming or nurturing our kinship family systems, which is where the children, youth, and family and community, from babies to elders, are able to engage together in the community.
You're recognized for your work with the Pacheedaht First Nation, and in particular in developing a youth wellness model that provides land-based community education programming. Tell me about the project, Reclaiming Nuu-chah-nulth Teachings to Empower, Strengthen the Roles and Responsibilities of Pacheedaht Young Men.
Sure. I first want to share this as my second career. I come out of the college system, and I came down from the Northwest Territories to complete a PhD at UVic. And so I've been back down on the island for 10 years and received my position 3 years ago. So I came into my position with a smaller shirt grant to work with Pacheedaht, and together we prepared for Tribal Journeys, which is a West Coast intertribal summer ceremony where Coast Salish, Nuu-chah-nulth, and Kwakwaka'wakw nations paddle from their home villages to the host nation, so from the 4 directions. And we prepared together for that journey. And it had been some time since Pacheedaht had participated, around 24 years. So together we were able to do some workshops centering youth, drum making, paddle making, cedar harvesting, to be able to make headbands. Through the grant, we were able to purchase a fiberglass canoe, an ocean canoe, and practice canoe safety and canoe journey teachings, and over 6 months. And then we paddled down to Lummi in the other side of the water in Washington State, and about 50 community members participated. So that indicated that we could continue on with this work together and as a university partner support priorities of the nation around language and cultural revitalization. So then we wrote our second grant together, and that's a 2-year project that we are almost completing now. In the heart of that project was carving a 33-foot red cedar dugout canoe with a Master Carver who has matrilineal ties to Pacheedaht. So bringing that knowledge back to the nation with 2 youth, male youth apprentices who worked full-time on the canoe for 4 months. And we engaged other activities, wraparound activities, so that children and youth and family were able to participate as well. And so we started that project in ceremony on July 1st. We followed Nuu-chah-nulth protocol to welcome the log and start in a good way. And our site was in the center of the village so that everybody could come by. It was very uplifting during the pandemic to have this cultural resurgence in the middle of the village, and to be able to have opportunities for community members and visitors to come by and see the progress and to help out, like with draw shaves or an adze to help a little bit along the way. So many, many hands have helped with making the canoe. And after we completed the canoe and had the canoe blessing, we've continued on in the wintertime with supporting Culture Night, which is a bi-weekly community gathering with a feast and drumming and dancing to awaken the ancestral songs and dances of the nation.
Well, lots of really interesting work that's going on there. Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like to be a participant in that community, or the experiences of the folks that you were working with?
Sure. I'd like to acknowledge my late maternal grandparents, Narcisse Cardinal and Agathe Desjardins, and my mom, Annette, and my late brothers, Scotty and Dwayne. Our family, like many Indigenous families, have experienced disruptions. My eldest brother is the last person in my family to attend residential school. And it was very difficult for him to share his story, and he's since passed on. My grandfather was in one of the Indian hospitals, Charles Camsell TB Hospital, for 5 years, which really disrupted our family. We lived on the land, as all families did then, up north, and that's when my granny moved into public housing, and that's another colonial entanglement with social services and public housing. And I'm the first generation born in the hospital with English as my main language. My maternal language is Cree, and my grandparents, as many people of the day, spoke a number of languages: Cree, Dene, French, English, Michif. I mentioned that because along the way, another part of our family disruption was the child welfare system, which came mostly at the tail end of residential school. So I experienced the 60s scoop and was raised away from my family and community, mostly on the unceded Algonquin territory in Ottawa, and then moved over to the island, to Comox, and repeated my last year of high school. I wasn't a very good student. And my friend, a good friend of mine in high school, her dad was the regional chief. So they brought me down to Comox First Nation. So there I was, almost 18 years old. And for the first time in my conscious memory, I was able to see Indigenous families and Indigenous people as strong instead of the hegemonic discourse in society that I was raised with in the 70s and the 80s. And that propelled me on a journey. This was also before, when we still had closed adoption, so our records were sealed. But a few years later, it was possible to start reunification if both parent and child were looking for each other. And my mom had gone to the Friendship Center in Vernon. She was living in BC at the time, seeking support and to try to find me. I'm the sixth of 7 children. And so it worked out. And then I moved back home to the Northwest Territories. So I've been reconnected longer than disconnected. And now as an older woman, I'm able to walk with strength and dignity as an Indigenous woman. And I also acknowledge that I'm very young in my teachings. I'm old in the face, but young in the teachings. I'm more like a teenager. And so I go about my work as what we would call noskapuis, a helper or a ceremonial helper. So I view myself as a helper in community based on relationships that I have. And because I've accepted a position at the University of Victoria, I feel some responsibility to work with local nations where invited. And so one of the nations that I've had a beautiful opportunity to grow a relationship with is Pacheedaht Nation, which is about an hour down the highway from Souk, where I live, and about 2.5 hours from the University of Victoria. It's one of the nations with reserves in the CRD, the Greater Victoria area, or district, Capital Regional District, I think it's called. So as a helper, that's the way that I guide my team. I had the good fortune of having a team of 3 Indigenous students from the university who worked with us, and the co-lead from Pacheedaht First Nation, the apprentices, the Master Carver, Micah McCarty, and an elder in training, Leona Canute. And we, together as a team, we'd circle up in the mornings, we would start our day in a good way and set intention. And as the university team, we would guide quietly from the side and be available for whatever was needed, whether it's buying tools and equipment, making breakfast or lunch, cleaning up the site, scooping up the cedar shavings, the logistics for culture night, putting up chairs, taking them down, and then all of the stuff that we do in the background as professors when we have grants in community, which I call knowledge translation as well, because we are trying to offer a seamless opportunity with communities that have entrusted us to work together. So all of those things that happen in the background in order to get the funding to community and so that all the resources can stay in community as well.
It's no easy task to coordinate all that. And I know one of the frequent criticisms of the university structure is the extent to which it expects its Indigenous faculty to take on relationships with the community and the added, what we would call, I think as scholars, we would credit our own research activity, like you were talking about with the research communication, but our structures tend to want to call it service. What's it been like to try to do this important work within the traditional colonial structures of a university that may or may not value that work?
I prioritize the values of my family and community and the communities I'm in relationship with. So it inspires me to be out in community and to be really mindful that I'm there as a helper to support the goals and vision of the nations and communities I'm in relationship with, that I'm able to bring that energy back to the university so that when I need to bridge that with the academic expectations and outcomes, I remind myself that it's a privilege to be in the university. There was a time in my previous career, I was the president of Aurora College, our college in the Northwest Territories, and when I received the position, my stepdad came to the college with me. He's my older sibling's dad, and learned a lot of his land-based skills from my grandparents. And we walked into the college and he said, "My girl, I know that your grandparents are really proud of you and that they weren't allowed to come in this building." So I try to be mindful of those who have come before us, the sacrifices and the hardships, and that I'm in a really privileged space to be able to be a professor as a second career, and that I really want to see strong communities for my own children, for future grandchildren, for the future generations. So when I come up with resistance in the institution, when I come up with needing to complete the community outputs, which would be a full research scope, percentage of our roles, and then complete the academic outputs, which is another 100%. I try to remind myself that there's a role for everybody in community and society, and we need some Indigenous faculty. We need some of us in the university. So I do think that there is some shift happening. I think there's more awareness of the relational approaches to Indigenous work, as well as to and any colleagues who are working with Indigenous communities, and that there's a lot that happens before we do what the research output is, and there's a lot that continues to happen afterwards as well. So my hope through being selected this year is that in some small way this can nurture the conversation around community-led research and what that can look like and what that means, and the opportunity for other outputs, research outputs, to be viewed as equal to our journal publications.
I agree, and I'm excited about the fact that your nomination was brought forward, and I think that in and of itself recognizes the quality of the work that you're doing, and I know I'm very pleased that we were able to recognize it with the award. One of your nominators described you as someone who spreads knowledge without people realizing it, and realizes the importance of balance. So why is it important to you to engage in research that's in the public interest?
I think I guess I kind of already answered some of this, but I do view myself as a helper, and I think that's very appropriate. I think it's an appropriate way to step into working with community as professors, with cultural humility, and we receive a lot of attention and when we have doctor in front of our name, we're viewed a certain way in society, and it holds a lot of weight. And I think it's really important to be able to step into community with humility, and our real doctors in Indigenous community are the doctors of the land, our elders, our old ones, our knowledge keepers. And as I shared a little bit about my life journey, I'm more of a teenager in my knowledge, so it wouldn't be right for me to present myself in any other way than as a helper, and where invited. So I think that might be why I'm more in the background. I understand what we want to do and how we want to do it and have a clear vision. And it's really about uplifting others, their gifts, their strengths, and being able to support that in a good way, and also try to keep things moving along and problem solve, and quietly be able, I think servant leadership is a more sort of quiet leadership style, and so that really works for me.
Clearly, you've made a huge difference with the community in which you're doing this research. You talked a little bit about the importance of universities supporting and recognizing the students, the Indigenous students within their communities. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about how your project interacts with access to post-secondary education or other education structures?
Mm-hmm. So one of the beautiful parts of our project that I can't take credit for, and certainly this project it really is a collaborative project, and I appreciate that I'm being recognized. It really is a collaboration. So as I mentioned before, our Bachelor of Child and Youth Care grad, Sheila Jones, she had written a paper for one of her courses and identified a role model program as important and helpful for children and youth. And so during the summer of the canoe carving, we had a weekly role model program. We piggybacked the weekly community lunch and invited in Nuu-chah-nulth role models who were able to speak to their pathways of wellness and what they're doing today. And for example, an artists came in, as well as people who have gone on to college and university. And one of the challenges at Pacheedaht, and my background is in education, so I'm always looking at educative implications and educative opportunities in community. So this is an informal education opportunity at this point. Children take the school bus 2 hours each way to Souk in order to complete high school. So that in itself is a huge commitment and a huge hurdle with, and there's weather as well that impacts the road conditions at times, especially in the winter. There's coming from a small community into a bigger community and bigger schools. There's the element of racism and isolation that can happen as well. So being able to continue on to grade 12 is a huge achievement in that context. So our role model program was great because Sheila and Tristan and many of who are part of our project, and then many other community members and Nuu-chah-nulth and a few Coast Salish speakers as well, came out and were able to really reach the young ones, the kids who are in grade 5 and 6 right now, thinking about, can I take that school bus every day? And planting those seeds to continue on in school. And then of course with the older youth as well. Part of our project, we've presented at the First People's House at the university. We've presented our work, and we've been able to do that in ceremony with the drummers and dancers. And so that's also provided an opportunity for young ones to consider that the university is a possibility and that there are welcoming spaces within the university, and that that their voices matter, and that they can make a contribution, and that university and college can be one option.
As someone whose field is education policy, to hear your story and the kind way you tell the story of students having to take a 2-hour bus to and from high school, we place demands on our Indigenous communities and students that we would find unacceptable on any other populations. That's a huge tax to ask students to do that. I don't know where I'm going with this question, but the fact that you're able to be so generous in your description of the opportunity to go to high school, rather than focusing on the fact that the province refuses to facilitate access for an isolated community.
Yeah, I could go that way too. So we have a really long history. The doctrine of discovery is over 500 years old, and that those religious edicts from the Pope provided the opportunity to conquer or vanquish non-Christians around the world, which resulted in colonial entanglements for thousands of Indigenous nations, and scientific racism, which I think lasted about 250 years, at least 200 years in the academy, which is the foundation of anthropology, medicine, biology, and many fields that classified humans by race with a racial hierarchy. Both those religious edicts and the doctrine of the scientific racism allowed for the settling of Canada and the Indian Act and the reserve system and the ongoing genocide of Indigenous nations, Indigenous families. So this is a tough part of Canadian history that that isn't taught in school, not in K-12 usually. It's taught in pockets at university, and all students get pretty upset when they first learn about this. But what that means for Indigenous students is that their lived realities are being discussed in the classroom a little bit more now. And it's huge to be able to survive the policies that we've survived, even child welfare. So when a young Indigenous person comes to the university, it's quite likely that it's been a huge achievement for them to be able to be there because of the very real policies and legislation that many of us still live under or with, and the substandard conditions on many reserves across Canada. And I'm not going to speak specifically to any of the nations that I'm in relationship with, but I just acknowledge that there's a long history in the Western world of BIPOC peoples and Indigenous peoples being inferior, and because of that, and the ways in which the land has been settled, it's almost as though it's been erased from memory that, these lands, that there was powerful ceremony and livelihood that on all of the lands across Turtle Island. I've observed, because I've traveled quite a bit in my life, and I've lived in different places in the world and studied in different places. Unfortunately, Canada has done a very good job of being supportive and empathetic to the plights of people in other parts of the world without looking at the conditions that have been created here for the first peoples, the original peoples, First Nations and Métis and Inuit peoples of these lands. And so daily life can be difficult in a lot of different ways. And with regards to Pacheedaht Nation and this particular project, there is a process to grow schooling up to grade 12 in community. And so one of the outputs of our project in bringing the Chiputs to life, we documented with photos and video, and we're making a curriculum unit to be used in the elementary school, and an ebook, and so that the little ones, I think there's 13 Pacheedaht kids at the school, they'll be able to see themselves in the curriculum. It's so important to have authentic materials from community so that children can see themselves and identify with what they're learning. There's also a real language resurgence of the Pacheedaht language, and so we're making an effort to support that with the book being bilingual and with the Pacheedaht educators who are bringing the language to the children as well. So I think it's important as best possible that we consider community education opportunities for credit, where there is that opportunity for children and youth to be able to receive school credit through meaningful projects where they are able to stay at home where possible, and that we can do and should do a better job. Those of us who have that opportunity through the academy, we should be able to champion quality education on reserve, quality education in Indigenous communities, and to look at education more broadly as that lifelong journey. It's often viewed as an inner spirit-based journey that each of us is on, and that the ways of learning with and from the land and our doctors of the land, as I mentioned, is so important. And that's not always found in textbooks or in books.
I'm so excited to hear about your pushing growth in education and pushing the access to education for the community, in the community. Mm-hmm. Again, going a little bit off script, I was reading yesterday an article in the paper talking about a SSRHC grant written completely in an Indigenous language that was submitted to SSRHC, both as a serious application for funding, but also as pushing the boundaries of the way SSRHC engages with the grants and the contents that are submitted to them, mm-hmm. Where they might bring in a French translator to translate a French application, but don't or aren't willing to embrace applications in Indigenous languages. So again, I don't know necessarily where I'm going with this, but these kinds of demonstrations of resistance, of pushing back on the colonial structures to try to facilitate change and to try to build value with mm-hmm. Indigenous communities and Indigenous languages and such. I see that thread in your work, mm-hmm. Both in the empowerment and building up of community, but also in pushing colonial structures. Mm-hmm. Within the academy, I know all of our universities are talking about the importance of reconciliation, indigenization, But I worry that we're talking about it and not necessarily doing anything. How, you talked a little bit about our institutions better supporting the Indigenous students who come there. What are some other things that our institutions can do to support indigenization and reconciliation?
That's awesome that someone submitted their SSHRC proposal in their language. I'm from the Northwest Territories. We have 11 official languages, 9 Indigenous languages, and French and English. And so we have the right to request services, public services in our language. So that's really great to see elders receive services when they go to the hospital, or our legislative assembly is translated, and so forth. That's really important. As I mentioned, the work that I'm doing right now is mostly with local nations I'm in relationship with. So I'm there as a helper. That's not my home nation. I think it's really important that we are thoughtful about whose lands we are occupying, and that if there aren't any local Indigenous scholars, then we need to think really hard about why and what actions are going to be taken to make sure that there are local Indigenous scholars and that there's local knowledge keepers engaging in meaningful ways beyond territorial acknowledgements, and having accountabilities at the governance level, in curriculum, in our approaches to our work. So it shows up in the classroom through the curriculum, through not only through recruitment of students and faculty and staff, but also in retention, so that people can see themselves in the institution. I work at a university that has a really large Indigenous faculty complement. I think it's one of the largest, if not the largest, in BC and in Canada. I feel fortunate because of that. There needs to be more understanding that Indigenous nations are diverse, that when Canada was settled, there's over 200 Indigenous languages, and easily over 40 Indigenous nations, larger tribal nations. And so there's a diversity of land-based knowledges and languages. These are sophisticated governance systems, with structures of natural law, and to bring that into our work in the university would only strengthen the possibilities at this time in our world. And there's a real need for us to shift from patriarchal approaches and into a more sort of matriarchal way of caring for our world. And that's something that everybody can be a part of. I feel that it's really important for administration to be aware of the added complexities for Indigenous colleagues. We usually come with children. We're usually far away from our home communities. And if we are closer to home, we usually have a lot of community responsibility as well. And even when we're far away, we may also have that as well. And we're constantly translating between what we need to achieve in the university in order to keep moving up the ranks and maintaining our position, while also maintaining integrity and being responsive and responsible in community which is a different value system from the academy, because the academy really emphasizes I and me, whereas the community is we. And so those are two different worldviews. They're two different approaches. And a good starting point for everyone is to acknowledge where they're working and living and whether they are in relationship. And if they're not, how are they going to start being in relationship? And if the white supremacist history of Canada is uncomfortable, reflect on that in order for us to enact the calls to action. I invite everyone to consider the advice that I've already given, because unless we think deeply about how we've come to live on these lands and whether we're homeowners or renters, but whether we have properties, and how we live each day, while there is, as my colleague, Dr. Sandrina DeFinney shares, she writes about the transcarceral system, the pipeline, from child welfare and to street involved to prisons. We're a very small population across Canada, I think something like 4% of the people, yet we're over 50% of the population in the prison system. We're over 50% of the population in child welfare across Canada. And now the Canadian government has been taken to court and has entered into settlements, so compensation agreements, for the entire history of Canada. The entire history of Canada, child removal systems. So there's now a settlement agreement for the Indian residential schools, which spans the 1870s until 1997. There's a 60 scoop settlement for status First Nations and Inuit, and there will be a settlement coming for non-status and Métis. That's from 1951 to 1991. And now the most recent settlement is for child welfare, often called the Millennial Scoop, from 1992 to 2022. So now Canada has entered into compensation settlements for Indigenous child removal systems for the entire history of Canada. So how can our families not have pain and difficulties that we face on a daily basis that the average Canadian doesn't face and isn't even aware of? So my hope is that through seeing the resurgence at Pacheedaht is one example of demonstrating that Indigenous nations are strong, and the governance systems, the natural laws, the natural governance systems embed language, culture, kinship system, health, wellness, education. It's all embedded within the natural laws. And so if we have the opportunity in the university or in the academy to support in a good way, then let's do it. Because I feel really strongly that through community wellness, our institutions will benefit from Indigenous community wellness, from Indigenous knowledges, if we can engage in respectful ways.
Great, thank you. It's been a powerful conversation for me to be a part of and to hear your stories. Clearly, we know about the intense harm done. We hear about the progress that's being made. but there's still so much more to do. And so I'm very grateful that we have you doing that work and others doing that work, and that there seems to be an interest in beginning to make true change rather than just talking about it. So thank you for your work and your commitments to the community and to sharing that with our community. Again, I'm going to say congratulations on the recognition and on the Ehor Boyanowsky Award. But I also want to give you another final chance to highlight anything that you'd like to highlight about your research.
About my research. I think I said that I center my research on healing from colonial disruptions to Indigenous identities. So it really centers community wellness and community resurgence of Indigenous knowledge systems. And I also continue with projects on Indigenous child welfare, primarily in BC, but also in the Canadian context. And I also contribute to decolonizing praxis, so how we can go about our work in the university, like with our curriculum, how to decolonize curriculum, and how to bring in diverse voices so that it's a better reflection of society and community in the academy. And I try to support and promote Indigenous students at the undergraduate, master's, and PhD level, as well as allies, students who have relationships with Indigenous communities and want to do their work in a good way. I really enjoy working with them as well.
Fantastic. So is there anything you'd like to say to your nominators or the selection committee?
Haitchkahale, thank you, everyone. I'm really humbled and appreciate that that this work that we've done together has been acknowledged at this level. And it really means a lot. When I received the call, my youngest was with me, who's 14, and my kids have watched their mom be, a life work of service. And it's really great for my kids to be able to see that recognition as well, that the way that we live our life and the way that we go about our days, that we're able to support others, and that we're able to uplift others, and that we're able to be in community together. I really can't think of anything better, a better way to spend the later years of my life. And I really appreciate the people that I've worked with. This really is a collaboration, and I'm grateful to each person on the team. And I thank CUFA BC for selecting me.
So thank you again for joining me today to talk about your work. I want to congratulate you again on being awarded the 2022 CUFA BC Ehor Boyanowsky Academic of the Year Award as part of our annual Distinguished Academics Award Series. I look forward to following your continued success at the University of Victoria, and I raise my hands to you and the work that you've done. So thank you very much.
Merci, Dan.